Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Mark for asking me to be here with you this morning in my home village. And I'm not going to call it, as other people do, a reservation, because it was never reserved for us. We have been here since the beginning of time, that lovely romantic statement, but it's true. And we're continually having to prove that it's true. We spend a lot of time in courts, but about 3 weeks ago, my grandson was traveling along the river for a walk with his dog, and he happened to throw the stick and it landed. And when he went to retrieve it near the water, going way out in the marsh, going towards Point Grey, something appeared in the mud. And so he took a better look at it and he started brushing away the mud little by little by little. And lo and behold, a gift to him. And did he dare to keep going, to keep seeing and unveiling what was beneath this mud? And he did. And he spent 3 hours digging in this terrible black mud that it was encased in. And out came for him a gift from our ancestors to prove our existence, this beautiful basket. Amazing, beautiful, intact basket. And he brought it home to me, and I was here spinning my wool as I do, and he came up the stairs and said, I have something. And I kind of looked up, and first thing I saw was black mud all over him. Because he had taken his shirt off to not get wet, and he was full of black mud. But I was like shocked and taken back. And of course, we brought it into my kitchen, and we were just overwhelmed. What a gift to him. And so we quickly did what we only knew we could do, is to phone the museum. I have friends there, and it's there being cleaned, it's there being looked after. And then we visited, and it's being, all the mud is coming off, and underneath we start to see this beautiful pattern appearing. And looking very closely at it, it's so finely woven that I'm totally, as I always am, impressed by my ancestors, impressed by their talent, by their ability, by their amazing way of bringing fibers from our environments, as we do in all cultures, to make these beautiful reflections of our history. And there was a time where these beautiful belongings of ours were called objects because an anthropologist found it. And this case, it was my grandson who is totally linked to this. And an anthropologist came forward and said, how did you do this? Because it takes us months and months and months to bring something like that out of the mud. But this was his gift, his one-on-one with his history. And speaking of, how we pass down history through our oral traditions, this was a gift for him. And do we dare at all to bring it to the museum, or should we keep it here? Or so, it was amazing. But that's how I'd like to open, is that we're always connected to our history, to our ancestors, to this beautiful place you all call Vancouver. This beautiful village that I live in is one of many, 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 many villages. And I always liked to share the history through my grandfather's eyes, who lived to be 100. And Mark asked, how do we start our mornings? And interestingly enough, I start my morning with my daughter driving along the very shores of Vancouver, always explaining to her and her children, if they're with us periodically, where these villages are, how old they are, and what is there now. And do the people that live there even know that there was a village where they are? And so all the mansions along Southwest Marine Drive were mansions of our people's longhouses. And when the first ship arrived here in 1791, Captain Vancouver arrived, that's him in the Spanish ship. That's exactly what they, wrote out. They said 7 canoes have come out to greet us. And these are the kind of stories, and I can't get into it because it takes a long time to explain those stories, but maybe someday I'll have one of those additional, stories that I can tell in different ways, or even maybe write a book about it. But that's the thing is Vancouver, I think I've mentioned to many of you, if you've heard me before, like, who are we in Vancouver? And it's a question that I always was asking myself. Even as a little girl, I used to go on the bus down to Stanley Park. I was always mesmerized by Stanley Park, and maybe not only because it held the zoo, but because it was a place where my people lived as well. My great grandmother was one of the last people escorted out of what is now called a park, which was our village. It's a shared village with Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh. And, it was a place where we all gather. We all have our village. So she was escorted out. And as she left, they burnt her house down and it became a park. Today we're having trouble with the park because it's overrun by coyotes. And what do? They've taken over. They don't want us there as humans. So we have a lot of work to do. But if I think about what it means to be a Musqueam woman here in Vancouver today, you really have to look behind me and see. I'm working again on one of my textiles that's going to go into a school and hang in the school to be a reminder of this beautiful land we're on. And I'm really excited about that because when I began so many years ago asking myself not only who was Vancouver, but who was I? And after I finished my challenges with sports and the mid part of my life, I really had asked myself who I was. Because residential school had done a really good job at taking the vision out of many communities and villages and right across Canada. And we all know that story, and it's one we're going to continue to work on for probably the rest of our lives. So I really wanted to ask myself who I was. And again, as Mark talked about, digging into the darkness of, who are we? Where do we go from here? I didn't adapt well to formal education. I didn't like it. And so as soon as I got to Point Grey High School, the first year that I could run away from it, I did. And I began working in a fish cannery and found that I just loved it there. And I still related to, coming from a fishing family, a fishing history, a fishing life. It's what Captain Vancouver said. He said, on this canoe, there are many reflections of fishing. There's a net made out of fishing, for fishing, made out of cedar. There's halibut hooks. There's all kinds of fishing gear on this particular canoe in 1791. And, that excited me because, again, as I mentioned, we always have to prove our existence, even in fishing rights, when we go to the Supreme Court and we have to, prove that we have rights to fish here. Wow. That's another story in itself, but fishing has been it's who we are, and without fish, without our lifeline, our people will no longer want to exist. I mean, and this is something that affects all of us through the world. I don't have to tell you, our oceans are warming, our forests are burning, our earth is shaking. It's shaking us up. COVID has shaken us up. Who are we now as people? And I think it was a very scary time for the last year to really, figure out, where do we go from here, or do we go anywhere, or do we stop really and really evaluate who we are as human beings? Not people running out to work every day or go on a holiday and get mad because we can't go on a plane. Not people who, only vision in life is to see how far can we go? Where are we going? And, oh, we're going to go to Mars. Well, the whole world is falling apart. Well, people are like, having to experience all these terrible things. We're flying off to Mars. And I thought, I used to joke with a lot of my friends and say, sometimes I think I want to go to Mars, but now I have to find another planet because everybody else wants to go to Mars too. after we've ruined this one. So my goal with part of what I do is to remind all of us to go back after we've been stopped in our tracks. The whole world's been stopped in their tracks. The whole world had to stop, stay home, stay in their houses, not be able to do the things they like to do, the things that we're entitled to do, the things we're spoiled to do. We had to stop and stay home and look at ourselves. We had to go deep if we could, but we've been taught not to. We've been taught never to stop doing what we're to keep going on that fast track, keep going, keep doing what you're doing. So when I stop, I'm really grateful that I have this behind me to fall on. This gift that I've been given. And it's not just my gift. Creativity is a gift from God. And to honor it and work with it the right way is a gift back. But the gift is back to everyone. It's not just for me, it's a collective. When we stood in our longhouses pre-contact and did this work, it wasn't just to make a pretty weaving to hang somewhere. It was a chief's blanket. And the plain ones were our everyday wear blankets. And so it was our responsibility to make sure everybody was clothed, everybody was prepared for ceremonies, prepared for their lives. And we would teach our children when they're younger about what it is to respect everything that we have around us. The teachings are there. And I talk to schools quite often and I ask teenagers, if you had the opportunity to go through a ceremony in becoming a teenager and becoming an adult, would you do it? And interestingly enough, they all say yes. So are our teenagers wanting something again that helps them and guides them to who they could become, other than just mainstream school? And maybe some of us do that. And I think we do. And I think especially in our creative communities, if that's what they are, I believe that everything trickles one way or the other and everything flows one way or the other. So even if we are in an academic world, we absolutely need our creative world and vice versa. And people say to me, oh, I could never be a weaver. And I say, I could never do your job. So everybody has a gift. And I don't want people to think that just because I'm a weaver and it's my gift, that it belongs to me, it belongs to all of us. And that's the thing that I find exciting is our women were so amazingly talented academically to do one of these weavings behind me. Your mathematics skills have to be in place. You have to add, divide, subtract. You're out in the environment, pre-contact, gathering everything you need to make these blankets so that they're comfortable and use their utilitarian. Everything we made was for use. It wasn't made to be an art piece. And we didn't sit around thinking how creative we were. We didn't sit around thinking how artistic we were. We had a different language. We were living and respecting and evolving to the place we wanted to be. And then when the Europeans arrived and didn't like the way things looked, we certainly shifted into a different place. So English for us, it cannot always define who we are and what we want in this world. But I'm quite certain that it goes across all cultures and that we all have something in our languages, in our lives, in our cultures that other cultures don't define the same way. And so I think we should be careful. And I do bring that to a lot of people's attentions, that I can't sometimes, or we can't define who we are in an English term and have them understand it. But we all think that way. So creative mornings and creative people throughout the world, I know you understand that. And that's important for us to share that. And the sharing that we're doing and we dare to share. Do we dare to share? Because we're open for people who don't want to. We're open for people that marched down the street of Vancouver and went into hospitals and literally sneezed over other people who were sick. And so where have we come to? So we need this creative process that we're involved with more than we ever did. And that's what this doing this, being involved with who I am as a Musqueam has done. It has brought me back to who I am and who maybe I've always been. And so, as I mentioned, the women who lived here pre-contact, the amazing ways in which they reflected their families and histories was gone for 80 years. Nobody knew about it. We were all in residential school, my grandfather, my father. So they didn't raise us up with that. It sounds romantic and lovely, but it wasn't a fact. And so that part missing from our community, I searched it out. I went into the darkness and searched it out. And I'm bringing it back out into the light for all of us to look at and admire in some degree, but also it reflects back to you that you too have this within you. In every single culture in this world, we're weavers. We are all connected through these threads of life, and we just merely have to reconnect them. And you know, the wonderful late Maya Angelou says we're as much alike as we are different. So let's celebrate that, but respect it. And so that's what's hard for us today, is to respect other cultures, because we're used to one way that we've adapted to. When I go into schools to teach, and I think they're teaching the same thing when I was there. But I'm very grateful for Langara to bring me in before COVID and teach there. And I was I quite chuckled when they said they were going to treat me as equal as their professors and pay me as equal as their professors. And I honored that. But I sort of giggled, because that's where this journey has led me. And it was where I kind of always wanted to go. But I also am just assisting what it is my ancestors are asking of me to be their voice, to be the voice of a history that was so wrongly interpreted, so wrongly misunderstood. And so I have to carry that integrity and their voices with me when I go, so that when I come to speak to anybody, I'm speaking on behalf of them, not on behalf of Debra Sparrow. And I do repeat that quite often. And I do it because it's part of our culture that we always tell that over and over and over until it's instilled in us, much like going to school and we have to study for our tests and we have to memorize everything. We have to memorize everything. If my grandfather wasn't in Supreme Court, we wouldn't have won our Shaughnessy case. We had to prove it that, you know, we belonged and that there was a breach of contract there. So oral traditions are so very important, but in every culture they are. I always like to be inclusive. I don't want to draw lines to say, you know, this is mine and this is yours. And we're struggling within our own communities. Not all of our people agree that we should all be MST, Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh. Some people they want to say, this is mine and this is yours. We've adapted to the mentality of colonialism. We fight each other. We're not all romantically sitting around weaving. In fact, you know, I've hardly taught anybody in my own community, but weaving can be taught to in every culture. So, you know, in this journey that I've been so graciously gifted, understanding what Salish design is. Today, our young people, you know, merely take out a pencil and start learning how to draw. But back before contact, everything we drew was a reflection of our environment again. And so these beautiful designs that reflect Salish designing were meant and were honored and were used in the community. And today we make prints out of them. We draw them for jewelry. We do many different things with them. We take them out of their history into the histories that we live into, the more natural environments, and we bring them into a contemporary world. I think much like the beautiful music we're listening to, and I love the name of your group, the Silk Road, and I honor the fact that I watched that program on the Silk Road and where it was, what it did, and all the beautiful, amazing people that I seen as it toured through the Silk Road. The beautiful, we all have that. We all have beauty to add to the world, beauty to add to one another, to make music, to create, to be sharing, so that we have an understanding of who we are in such a way that is non-threatening to anybody, to each other. And I think that's what creativity does and should do. You know, quickly I'll lead into the movie. It's really just a little bit of a synopsis of what I've been, you know, carrying these last years and learning to do all the things that I did and being gifted by my ancestors to do this work. It was one of my goals always to, I used to look at the city of Vancouver, and when I was there, see the buildings, see how it's changed over the years, but really wonder what would we define ourselves as Vancouver in terms of creativity and art. And I never seen anything outside. So I used to say, I'm not going to stop doing what I do till I wrap the city of Vancouver in our work and our designs, and that Vancouver would be equally appreciative and excited about how we could do that. And so that was one of my goals like 20 years ago. I really didn't focus in and say, I'm going to literally do it, but it unfolded before me, and everything that I did and was asked to do, it sort of, that's what happened. It led me to this. So one day I was walking, getting a coffee, and I seen Georgia Strait, and it said Mural Fest of Vancouver, and it hit me, and I thought, murals, where's Musqueam murals? So I emailed the fellow, and he emailed me right back, and he asked me if he could come visit, which he did, and we had a long conversation about murals, and lo and behold, he said, would you consider doing one with us? And I said, consider it, I'm in. So the first one we did was down at the city, under the Granville Bridge, and it's there for your viewing. Then we moved on to Kingsway and 12th, Biltmore Hotel. And then we did one mural that's, we're still finding a home for Stanley Park, in which I honored my great grandmother. And then the current one we're working on, we just finished, is at Richards and Dunsmuir, and it's the BC Hydro cylinders that are there. And we teamed up with Squamish and Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh, my relatives, Chief Janice and Ange George from Tsleil-Waututh. So the three of us ladies who have carried weaving took, again, our elements, design elements out and applied them onto the cylinders. And the Mural Fest and I have had a great relationship. We're still working on one, and we've got some really interesting and amazing, cool things coming up in the next year that I won't share with you now because it's still secret. But it's going to blow your mind about even more than the murals. So they asked if we could do a little intro video for the Mural Fest. So I said yes, and I figured it would be 1 minute to the Mural Fest, and the rest would be all about the Vancouver murals, which I honor all of the artists in the Mural Fest who are doing amazing work, giving Vancouver a dress, and me making my way still through Vancouver, because I'm not just doing murals, I'm actually working with buildings now. And so it's growing, and it's manifesting itself into the city. And we are standing in Vancouver on the ground of our ancestors, and their roots that are so deep here are coming up and growing into the trees that we want it to be, so we can dress the trees, which are the buildings downtown, with our beautiful reflections of our history, which, by the way, I know all of you will find a pattern there that you can relate to in your history. So we share that with you as well. So that's what this video is about. Enjoy.
close to her heart at her home in Musqueam. As Debra says, it is not art as you know it, but a way of life as we know it. And I'd like to welcome Debra Sparrow here.
You know, it's interesting to say, how would I like to be introduced? I think, you know, all the years I've thought about this, I would love to be introduced on behalf of my people and my ancestors, and invite everybody into conversations about who we are as Musqueam people. To be here now in Vancouver in a more contemporary modern day is still a challenge. And as Musqueam people, as women, we brought design elements from our environment, inspired by everything that we've seen and felt and heard even, and created them in the blankets. And this is what we've come to understand, because blankets had, I don't want to use the word disappeared, I think they were put to sleep for almost 100 years, and they weren't seen, they weren't acknowledged, but they are everything we are. They are the foundation of our Musqueam people, of our Salish people. They define our ceremonies, they define our laws, they are our existence. Growing up in Musqueam, watching how everything in our longhouses unfolded before my very eyes, watching the fires, watching our elders speak, watching, you know, everything that reflected our history in that one contained room, I felt like I was back in time. You know, when I was 19, I traveled north to what I mentioned earlier, is to the mid-coast, where it's known as Alert Bay, and just being up there and seeing the influence also of how they held their culture. It really made me question, if we had our winter ceremony, what else did define us? What else was there? You know, I left there after about 5 years, and I came back home. I rerouted myself, and I had my first child, so I wanted to raise her in Musqueam. At that time, there was, ironically, this course offered at the Vancouver Indian Centre, which said Salish weaving, and we were quite interested because we didn't even know that anybody else knew about Salish weaving. In between all of that, I would go and visit my grandfather, and I said, so, you know, do you know anything about weaving? And he's like, yeah, I do. He said, well, when I was just a little boy, I don't know, I must have been about 3 or 4, I was just coming to my senses. I was, you know, in the back shed with my grandmother, Spakia, and they were all working on the blankets. They took me to the longhouse, but they wrapped me in a blanket, and it was the beginning of the ceremony where I'd get my name. And I said, you know what you just did, don't you? That the last person you saw do weaving was your grandmother. He said, yes. And I said, how long ago was that? He goes, well, it must be like 82 years ago or so. When do you see it start again? He said, well, with you girls, my granddaughters. For some unknown reason, asthma emerged in my life, and it was a challenge for me for a good 15 years. And lots of times when I'd lay in the hospital and I'd be thinking about my people still when I was sick. And I used to think to myself, you know, who are you, Vancouver? I don't think if Vancouver knows who it is, it would be beautiful to actually take some of our patterns and wrap the city of Vancouver in a blanket and share an identity with them, because they're not going anywhere and we're not going anywhere. And yeah, the story just kept going, that I would eventually, just kept having people come and ask me to do another one and another one. And I step back in time every time I'm creating a blanket. And when I'm in my kitchen working on my textiles and my weavings there, I leave the world behind. And I'm sane again. I'm connected again. It's my medicine. It's my reason for being here, and to be very responsible for how that moves through this world that we live in today.
Pleasure to welcome a very important member of our community, Debra Sparrow.
I'd like to welcome Debra Sparrow.
Weaver from the Musqueam Nation. This is Debra Sparrow.
And that brings us to today, when we're working now at Richards and Dunsmuir, and we decided to invite my cousin Anne George from Tsleil-Waututh and Chief Janice George and her husband Buddy. This would be the first time that we would literally take our patterns kind of out of their comfort zone together as three major tribes here in the city.
The Cathedral Park project is so important. I'm just really honored to be a part of it. And I think it's a great place for individuals to go and have a first look at the designs that are involved in our Coast Salish weaving. It's not just art, it's very spiritual.
This project is vital for our communities coming together and reuniting, repatriating our lineages and our connections to each other. The Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people have deep-rooted connections to each other, to these lands.
The story unravels even more when the news comes on in a contemporary world and says 250 children are found at the Kamloops residential school. And so I'm down there at the pillars and I'm looking at the Catholic Church across from me, and I'm feeling very uncomfortable. But I think about the patterns behind me, and I think about my history, and I'm comforted by knowing that our people have survived and will continue to do so. I thought to myself, I'm going to represent the 215 children. And so we had Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and myself come forward again, and we invited our children, and we put 20 dots inside each design to represent those 200 children, and then 15 right in the middle of the circle.
Right here, us, this is what love looks like.
Sometimes you can't know what is going to come next, and the story goes that now, where do we go from here? And there are other weavers in our community. There's other weavers in the other villages all throughout the Salish country now. It's making its way back into all of our villages. It's bringing the values, as I spoke of earlier, back into all of our communities. It's reflecting itself in the city, wherever we go. That for me is just what it's always been about, is bringing it back into the world. And the thing that my grandfather left with me when he left this world at 100, and I visited him in his bedroom, and he said, everything that I've shared with you, you share with whoever else wants to know. He said, know who you are and know where you come from. Because if you know that, then nobody can tell you otherwise.
Oh, Deborah. Oh, was so extraordinary. Thank you for sharing that with us and your time and your creativity and your art and everything that you do. I'm going to open up questions now for everybody here. There's still quite a number of people here. Use, if you can, please. My colleagues can help me maybe point in the right directions, but for me, it's easiest if you look at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, a comment, or something you'd like to say, you can put it in the chat. That's cool if you don't want to be spotlit. But there's a button at the bottom that says reactions. And if you click at the bottom of that, if you click on it, yeah, so Shiraz has, if you see, he's got his hand up. And then if you raise the hand, I can come and grab you and we can have conversations. I would like to make a comment though, and I'm taking a risk because I forgot to mention to discuss this with Deborah, so I don't want to offend her or make any assumptions. I find, having done a fair number of a bit of work rather with Indigenous community and having my own relationships with Indigenous folks, a common question among settler groups, which is a totally normal thing. I get it. It's like, what can we do to help Indigenous people? It's a great question, but let's have that conversation elsewhere between us and figure out our own journey. Heaving those questions on Indigenous folk to then force them to feel, the burden of answering on behalf of the others is unfair. So let's focus on Deborah's craft, her creativity, her history, her art, the story she shared today. And let's avoid that question for the time being, if that's okay. I'm sorry, Deborah, if I misspoke in how I stated that, but I don't want, you've had that question thrown upon you so many times. I thought maybe today we could cut you a break.
Don't mind.
You don't mind? Okay.
No, and I can answer it very quickly and shortly.
Okay.
All
oh my gosh. Okay.
Well, here it is. Just keep doing what you're doing, and all of you. Just keep doing what we're doing. We're sharing right now. That is the value behind it. I want to share a little story with you quickly. A man was very distraught back in the day, and he took himself up to the top of a mountain, and he stood there and he fell to his knees and he reached up and he said, "Oh, God, creator, Allah, what you must think of us and what we've done to your world, to your earth. Please send someone to help." And a voice came through the wind and it said, "I did send someone. I sent you." So every one of you out there, all of us as individuals, to become that one is phenomenal.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. It was excellent. And I just reflected on the Palestinian villages lost compared to Indigenous one. My question is about multi-generational change in the design. What do you learn from your granddaughters and grandsons about the technology and the designs they make on computers and so on? And what do you teach them in terms of focusing on oral literature? Thank you.
Well, this particular way in which we are designing today, the newer, younger generation that's now grasping it and bringing it into technology, I'm excited about that. I think we all have to grow in some direction, but at the same time, I want to stay really rooted. So I have my hand spun and dyed and made pieces behind me that are the inspiration for our youth, I hope. And when they take those elements, as we did, to bring them out into the murals and combine different ways of growing them, it really, I really have to take a deep breath, because it's like letting your child go out into university. So I'm like, oh, but you know what? I want everyone to see it. I want everyone to enjoy in any way that they can. And so sometimes, I just have to take a step back. And as I've mentioned many times in lots of my conversations, I always have to take a step back and just go ahead and encourage our younger people who are using computerized design elements. And then I get nervous that are we becoming so much like everybody else that we lose who we are? Or is that a question for all cultures? And so how do we maintain our own identity? And I said it, we're much as like as we are different, but it's how we put the patterns together in life that make us who we are. And so we can identify that. When I look at another textile from anywhere in the world, getting to know them, I can see that. And in my community, you can definitely see how we put our patterns together. So I just know that in our world, we have to balance our history with what are doing in our contemporary world today. And it's the balance in life. It's the balance of how we look after this world today too, that we have to balance, looking after our trees that are burning down, and yet still keeping a job in the industry of forestry and logging them down. Like, this is a controversy that we're all feeling. And so we just have to keep going. And I don't mean forward, just keep this positive balance between who we are as people.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning, Mark. Thanks so much, Deborah. That was very inspiring, to be honest. I have two little questions for you. The first one is, do we have statistics about like how many weavers do we have right now in Lower Mainland, maybe, or in general in BC, active right now? So the second question is about the patterns. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I know that there are different patterns from different nations, different locations. We can trace them back if you want to. Can you speak a little bit to the specifications of the patterns from different regions? Thank you.
Yeah, the weave, if you're speaking of Indigenous weavers or Salish weavers, there was a time where there was maybe just a few of us. It's growing and it's growing. And many people are teaching weaving now, and they say, am I allowed to learn Salish weaving? Well, I think I mentioned earlier, we're all weavers. We come from weaving history, whether it's a floor loom and a stand-up loom. We all have it in our culture, and there's something about connecting to it when you put your hands on the work and you begin to understand how it all works and how patterns work. And yes, when we look in history, we see these amazing patterns that the women were creating. And because there was 80 years, we didn't have teachers, by the way. We had to teach ourselves through this beautiful book called Salish Weaving by Paula Gustafson, who was so in love with Salish weaving. Thank her that she did this book. And in there we see all the beautiful blankets that have been collected in our museums all over the world. And we got to bring them home 3 years ago to the Museum of Anthropology in partnership with them, because we couldn't bring them home. We didn't have anywhere to hold them. And again, we are like honored and amazed at the patterning and the beauty of these blankets. And we don't know what they may have meant because of that 80 years that was silenced. And when I asked my grandfather why he didn't tell me, he said, you didn't ask, and why would we teach you something that you were never going to use in your life? And so I was sad at that, because I realized that colonialism and residential schools had done part of the job that the government had said when they said we're going to take the Indian out of the Indian. That almost happened. But if you look behind me and you see a string hanging, we hung on by that string, and we have now like spun ourselves partly back in time, and we come forward and we see that when we're out on the water on a canoe and the water is rippling beautifully through we take those memories and we inspire ourselves to put them on the loom, or we identify with something in our community, much like, again, I'm sure all cultures did. And so, but if you look at patterns in the geometric patterning, and then you look into the universe and you look back in time at how amazing it must have been for these wonderful people who were creating the originals to have the intelligence to bring forward these patterns. That's what excites me. It excites me, their intelligence that we were told was not there by other people. So we're still working on, we have relatives in Chilliwack who some didn't stop weaving, but we didn't know of them then. And they do pass on to us some of the definitions of the patterns. And so, yeah, we're still working on it. Thank you.
Morning, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Lovely. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us today. It was so inspiring. I now feel like I want to go and create something immediately. But you touched on this a little bit earlier, talking about how, like, in our current society and like with the current schooling system and things like that, creativity is often kind of put on the sidelines. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit to if you had any kind of like pieces of advice you have received, or any kind of themes or thoughts that have kept you like following a path of creativity in a society that tends to kind of push it to the wayside.
I love living by the wayside. I love it there. And I love stepping over back into society sometimes. And even in schools, like I'll share with you a quick story of working in schools and bringing this information forward and being at the museum. And I actually wrote a curriculum around all of this called Weaving Two Worlds Together, because that's what it's about. It's about the understanding and connection that all cultures have academics, all cultures have science to offer, they have socials and histories to offer. And so Jill Baird from the museum and I wrote this a good like 15 years ago. We're not using it as much, but it's on its way back. So when I was at the museum and just sharing this school program that I have, you know, a parent came up to me at recess and asked if they could speak to me. And I said, sure. And she said, I want to apologize to you. And I said, okay. And she said, because when my son said he was coming to this program, I said no, that he couldn't go to a Musqueam program. And I said, okay. And she said, in fact, I was quite adamant that I wouldn't pay the $5. And I said, okay. And then she said, well, Debra, she said, I listened to you and I'm embarrassed and I want to apologize that I judged you wrongly and your people. And I said, then my job is partly done. Because, you know, that's where we want to go with what we're sharing here, is that all of us have within our cultures those very things that are being taught in school and in societies. We just had walls up and we didn't want to know. In fact, we don't know so much about the history in Vancouver and in other places. And we are going to be open to that. And how much do we open? How much do we share till it becomes, you know, the same as everybody, is yet to be seen. I personally, and this is big, don't want to share my language with everybody. It's the one thing we had left that was unique to our community that we could safely say was still ours, but now we teach it in universities. And I don't know if the people in the universities that are learning can deliver the language the way my elders did. However, that's the shift and change that we have when we stay living it by the wayside, when we stay in our village. In fact, you know, it's interesting because I think my sister said to me, and she's a past chief, she said, you know, sometimes we live in a cocoon in Musqueam. And I said, I like cocoons because butterflies come from them. So this is our metamorphosis, that we're sharing the beauty of the butterfly now out there. So thank you.
Debra, with that, let's express our appreciation. Everyone, a round of applause to the wonderful Debra Sparrow. There's a little soundtrack so we don't have to unmute everybody. Thank you so much for everything that you do and for joining us today.
Well, I want to end it. Mark, I
Yeah.
have something to share with you all before we go, because our subject was
okay.
dare. It was dare.
Yeah.
So don't you dare for one more second surround yourself with people who are not aware of the greatness that you are.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Wow. Okay. That's awesome. Well, I want to surround myself with more Debra Sparrow. Thank you, Debra.